Sarah is an independent accessibility specialist and front-end UX developer who emphasizes data visualization and ethical tech. Now, data visualization is a big area. Now, I remember a long time ago when data visualization used to just be like slapping a infographic on a web page and just maybe slapping some alt text on there and calling that a day. But really, what we've seen in more recent days is a much more advanced presentation of data on the web. And how the heck do we make that more accessible, especially when it comes to like custom views and filters? Sarah has all of that for us, and I'm really happy to welcome her to the stage. Hey, Sarah, it's really good to see you.
Yeah, it's very nice to be here. I hope my screen is sharing right now. I only have one screen set up, so I cannot see what the rest of the people are seeing.
Yeah, it is coming right up there. There we go. Now your screen is on point.
Yeah, I'll be talking about Dataviz today.
Well, I'm very excited about that because like I was saying, it used to be, you know, infographics were just the way that like we presented data on the web in a really interesting way, but now it's gotten so much more advanced and complex. You know, how exactly did you get into data visualization as, you know, as we get, you know, launched into your talk on it?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. Like, I was already working a little bit with Dataviz and like different consultancy jobs as part of my front-end roles. And then in 2016, it was actually with the US presidential elections when I was seeing the results coming in and seeing like there was this breakdown on CNN of which demographic voted for which candidates. And for me, it was like a very stressful period because it coincided with the period where I was coming out as queer. So it was very stressful when I was looking at those graphs and those quite depressing results. And I struggled understanding the graph because there was so much going on in my head that it didn't make sense. And then I started thinking more about like the more understandability and usability of Dataviz. And shortly after that, I switched to a company where we were working with dashboards for cancer researchers, and I was contributing to risk management. And then I really started getting into accessibility as well, because we started looking at what can go wrong when a researcher or a doctor picks the wrong element to put into the cancer medicine. And then we started discovering, well, if our charts and our data tables and such aren't accessible, then doctors or clinicians with disabilities may actually accidentally end up killing a patient. And then I realized like how important actually accessibility is, not just for the people who are disabled and using it, but as a wider context to all of society. And since then, that was 2017, I've been more and more like researching it in my spare time and trying to push internally at companies to like work more with Dataviz accessibility and accessibility as a whole.
Well, you know, a lot of us cannot say that we are, you know, doing things in here that we're putting an effort towards curing cancer and saving lives. But here we are talking about that exact thing with data visualizations. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you. I'm really excited to learn about all the advances and what sort of issues that come up in data visualizations and how we can do better with them. So I'll let you take it from here.
There's a lot of issues. So yeah, today I will going over some common Dataviz accessibility issues that I've come across the past couple of years while testing visualizations for other companies and while developing my own, and also while just doing my own research in my spare time. And I'll also give some pointers on what we can do to like avoid making those mistakes. And just a couple of notes about me. I'm Sarah Fossheim. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an independent accessibility specialist with a background in front-end development and UX design. Currently, I'm still located in Oslo, where it's -1 degrees outside Celsius. But I'm about to move to the very north of Norway to an area that's called Varanger, where I will be the neighbor to like 100,000 seabirds and where temperatures can reach up to -30 degrees Celsius. So that will be quite exciting very soon. And I'll go over mistakes that I often come across. Those are based on WCAG testing, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which most people by now probably have at least heard in passing, and also Chartability, which is a framework specifically for testing Dataviz accessibility. But before I go into that, I also want to emphasize that none of the issues I will show are actually the fault of one person. And it's often accessibility a team effort, and often also gets blocked by company culture or by someone higher up, or budgets or timelines. So I also want to avoid, when we go over those charts where there will be some funky mistakes, that we put the blame on the individual developers who have contributed to that, because it typically is part of a bigger issue. But I'll come back on that at the end as well. And the first set of issues I want to go over are visual issues, so things relating to like the visual layouts. And one that most people have talked about probably, or have heard in passing, is the way color is used. And one of the most common issues, especially a couple of years ago, before accessibility and Dataviz accessibility became more talked about, was that visual elements lacked color contrast against the background. So WCAG says that regular text should have a color contrast of 4.5/1 against the background. And that's to make sure that everyone can read this. And for example, this is an example from a newspaper, I think it's VG, a Norwegian one, that showed the results of the 2023 Norwegian election results. And they had red and green to indicate an increase or a decrease in votes in the party. And the green was not high enough contrast. And I already right now during the presentation find it really difficult to read this text on the right. And more often, what I find with charts is the text is becoming better and better. People are more aware of it. But also the graphical objects that are part of the chart should have enough contrast. So here they made a breakdown per party with dots or squares to show how many votes or how many seats in parliament each of those parties got. And they used the colors, the brand colors of the parties. But again, it was less than 3/1, so against WCAG compliance guidelines. And it's a small issue, or you might think of it as a small issue. It's just a color code. It's just one line of code in order to fix it, but actually has a really large impact. Like people with low vision or who have issues with perceiving color contrast otherwise might not be able to read any of your charts or parts of your charts. Like the other issue on the bottom is the results of how many backyard birds are observed each year. That's published by BirdLife. They used a very light yellow. So for some people, they might not see any of the results. They might just perceive the images and nothing else. But as a secondary impact, it's also, and maybe something you've already heard about, it affects people who don't have like high resolution screens. So for example, if you're at a conference, if BirdLife wanted to show their chart results of how many birds were perceived in people's backyards each year, might not be able to see this properly when you're on like a really bad projector screen. And something else that you might not think about at once is if you print those results, it might be even less visible. And I find this important to mention because it's an accessibility measure I myself have on occasion had to use. I sometimes experience migraines, and then looking at the screen becomes incredibly painful over time. And sometimes I'm not able to do anything on screen. So I've started printing out the things I wanted to read more often, or reading them on a Kindle or Kobo or something. And when printing, it also has as the added benefit that you can make annotations. It's less bright. You also don't have to look at your computer where you're constantly being bombarded with news and reels and text messages from people, and you can just more easily focus on what's there. So to me, paper is actually a form of accessibility as well. And these color contrasts can be tested across the entire product development process. If you're designing, you can use tools like Able or Stark in Figma, or in Sketch, or in other tools. There will be similar plugins where you select the foreground and background color, and it will tell you what the color contrast ratio is and whether it's compliant with WCAG. If you're in the development stage already and you're working on your website, you can use something like Lighthouse or Axe. Both are free tools to test the code directly in the browser, and it will also check for color contrast requirements. And if you don't want to do either of those things, if you're not very technical, or you're using some type of code where X or Lighthouse cannot pick up on, then you can manually test those things using, for example, WebAIM's color contrast checker, and paste in the color values, and it will also tell you which of those guidelines it's complying with. A different color requirement is that you shouldn't be relying on color alone to explain the data. And that's also an issue I come across very often still. For example, these election results from the Norwegian 2023 elections. Here, we have a map of Norway where all of the municipalities are colored based on the party that received the most votes there. And for some people with certain types of color blindness, all of those colors or some of those colors will end up looking the same. For example, here we have the Center Party in green and the Arbeiderpartiet, which is the Workers' Party, in red. But for people who cannot perceive green, both of those will receive the same color. Or a bit more drastically, pink and blue will also end up looking almost the exact same. And in this case, the Socialist Left Party and the Progress Party, which is the far right party, actually end up looking the same as well. So when you're trying to get an overview of whether the left wing or the right wing in Norway, or in which areas of Norway those are most popular, it might be hard for people with color blindness to get to that information. And for people who cannot perceive color at all, so achromatopsia, for those, all of those colors will end up looking the same. There will all be a shade of gray. And that's an issue because, as I said, some of the meaning will disappear, or all of the meaning will disappear for people who are colorblind. And some of this you can start testing for early on. You can plan color palettes using, for example, a very useful tool called Viz Palettes, where you add all of the colors you want to use in your data visualization, and it shows you how it looks in different types of charts, and also with different types of color deficiencies. And when you're working in the browser, for example, Firefox has, in the accessibility tools in the inspector, a tab where you can simulate color blindness. So as you're testing someone else's website, testing your own website, you can at once see for all different types of color blindness what the color palette will look like. And then when you discover issues, you can mitigate them either by adding text labels or image labels directly in the context. So in this case, 538 had blue and red, blue for Biden votes, red for Trump votes, and added Biden's name and Biden's image on the blue side and Trump's name and Trump's image on the red side. Or a different example is this paper from the 90s, which shows the correlation between different types of nest sites for European shags and how successful they were at breeding at those different nest sites. And they used white with a black outline, white with a black pattern, and fully black as the three different types of colors. And I thought that this was a fun example because I think they got to this accessible palette not by thinking about accessibility, but because of the type of tools they used at the time. People who were in school years ago, before everything was fully digital, may remember the projectors, like the overhead projectors that they used, with plastic sheets that were see-through on which the text was printed, and then that would be projected on a wall. So then you had to work with black and white, and things needed to have enough contrast and work with different types of colors that were, or not with colors, but with black and white and different types of patterns. And you may see all of that and be like, yeah, but it's not necessary because you can still interact with charts to get to the same amount of information. And my answer to that is no, unfortunately, not always. For example, here on this chart of the Norwegian election results, I could hover over the different municipalities, but I did not get any information. I could click on them to get to a page with information, but it took 20 seconds each time I clicked for the page to actually load with new data. And with keyboard interaction, I couldn't get to it whatsoever. So if your fallbacks aren't accessible, then the chart will still remain inaccessible for people who have multiple disabilities, or people who are colorblind and whose Bluetooth mouse is out of battery, or keyboard users who are using a screen with low contrast or a black and white screen for some reason. Then the last part of the more visual issues, here there's already a little bit of development work that goes into fixing it, and that's the behavior when you zoom into a page. In a lot of pages, and I really mean a lot of pages across the web, it's not possible to zoom into the page or enlarge the text without breaking the layouts. And this is something I also often myself come across, not because I'm testing, but because I actually need to zoom into the page in order to read it. Like, I wear glasses, but still often it hurts wearing my glasses the entire day. So I take them off and I zoom into the web page to read, and I browse the web at 150 or 200% zoom. And quite often parts of the page will not be accessible whatsoever. And here's an example of this in the latest US election results. This is from NBC, and I start zooming in to 200%. And then I scroll, and there's a sticky header that takes up like around a third of the page. And then I keep scrolling, and I get to a table, which also has a sticky header. And completely, like, I get to see 4 rows of the table at the same time. And it's even worse when I zoom into 400% and start scrolling. Then I have just a very small bar where I can see anything. And when I get to the table, there's actually nothing of the content that's perceivable. It's just completely stuck like this. Similarly, when I change the font size using custom style sheets, quite often everything will become on top of each other. There will be overlays. Text will disappear and become hard to read. And that's something that I find is the easiest to fix while you're developing, to whenever you start adding something to the layouts, to zoom into 200%, to zoom into 400% using Command or Control+ in the browser. And then when you see that there's issues, you could, for example, use media queries to adapt the layout to different viewports. So similar to how you would make things responsive for mobile, you can also make things responsive for Zoom. And then now we've seen the very visual issues. Now I want to move over to the things that are a bit more related to assistive technology. And the first thing there is keyboard interaction. And mainly that things are often not accessible by keyboard at all. That the interaction that's available through pointer interaction, so by using the mouse, quite often that's not accessible when using the keyboard only. I already pointed this out when showing the results of the elections in Norway, that I could click on the individual municipalities to get more info about who got the most votes there, but I could not get to it using the keyboard. Sometimes there's also hover effects, but also very often those hovers or those tooltips that only appear on hover do not appear when focusing with the keyboard, or the individual items are not able to be focused at all. And here's another example of this, of the US elections, where on CNN I could hover and get a lot of information about who got votes in which states, but then here I'm trying it by keyboards and it just jumps past the charts. So again, things are not often accessible by keyboard. And there, again, something that you can do is test it while you're developing it. If those specific issues where things cannot receive keyboard focus or not the right elements receive keyboard focus, that's quite easy to detect. If you're on a page and you start using a tab key, if you just implemented something where you have added a hover effect and then you use your tab key and you jump straight past it, you should probably do something, for example, making it accessible on focus. But that in itself is not really enough, because another issue I often come across is that there is keyboard interaction implemented, but it's not intuitive or not very understandable. So it's not enough that there is some interaction that you can perform by keyboard and that it's technically compliant. It actually has to make sense on a user experience level as well. And here's an example from Reuters. Here I'm using the tab key to jump to the results of the different states. And the tooltip will correctly appear on focus. But I'm going through it quite fast, but as you can hopefully see, it's in quite a random order. Like, it jumps from South Dakota to California to Kentucky, and then to New York, and then to Texas, and then to Minnesota. Like, there's not really much of a logic to it. It's not sorted alphabetically. It's not sorted left to right or right to left. It's not sorted by amount of votes. It's completely random. Or maybe there is some order to it, but it's not communicated in any case. And that can be a bit of an issue because visually I might see, I know where Kentucky is, so I go to it with my mouse and I get the tooltip that tells me how many votes there were. But for a keyboard user, how are they supposed to know how many times to press tab to get to it? It's quite unpredictable. And this is a place where designers can come in and assist the developers by documenting the expected behavior in their design files. There are some tools that you can use in Figma to document the keyboard order or the focus order, or you can also just do it yourself with annotations. Annotate what you think should happen when the user clicks a specific button. Where should the focus shift? When tabbing through a chart, should each element by itself be highlighted, or should the user first go through specific groups and then press enter to enter the groups, and so on. But it's important there to remember that, like, we're doing this for people who rely on keyboards interaction to navigate the charts. So this should be based on user research and accommodate to their needs, not to what we as designers think it might have to be. And for that to happen, we also need to be aware of accessibility guidelines and best practices. And similar issues happen when using screen readers. So the main issue there that I come across is that we're not doing anything with SVG elements. Like, charts are often built with SVG. And when you create HTML elements, when you use a button or a link or a table, those are semantic elements, and they give screen readers some information, which the screen reader then communicates to the screen reader user. So for example, when focusing on a button, VoiceOver will tell me that this is a button and I can use Control Option Space to interact with it. And when I open the headings menu, then all the different headings will be there, sorted by heading level and order they appear in the page. And when using landmarks like the nav element or the header element or footer or aside, those will end up in the landmarks menu. So all of that can give users some kind of information about the structure of the page. But SVG elements by default, they don't contain any of that information. So a screen reader will not know what to communicate back to the user. And this is one of the results of this. This is an example, again, from BirdLife of their backyard bird count. Each January, February, they ask people to report all the birds they see at their bird feeder, and then they make reports to show how this changes. And these graphs show the percentage of bird feeders that the different birds appeared at. And the first one is the shutmice, or the great tit. And it shows visually, I can see that from 2008 to 2025, it's been around 90% of bird feeders had this bird appear. And this is what it sounds like to a screen reader when no one has done anything with the SVG element to make it accessible.
3. Kjøttmeis 2010, 2015, 2020, 2025, 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%, 2010, 2015, 2020, 2025, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, heading level 3, blåmeis, 2010, 2015,
So by default, when we don't do anything with our SVGs, the only thing that the screen reader can announce is the text elements and nothing else. So in this case, the developer probably did not know about this and did not add extra information to it. So screen reader users who come to this page will not really get any information. And here's another example of the US elections by the Wall Street Journal. And it's a slightly different experience, but it comes down to the same thing.
Cartogram of US presidential electoral map. Each small block represents one electoral vote, with 538 total, each grouped by state. States colored by candidate leading or one. Blue indicates Democrat and red indicates Republican. Group. Image. 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 You are currently on an image. To begin interacting with the contents of this image, press Control, Option, Shift down arrow. Image, 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 image.
And it does this for like 500 something blocks. And that gets quite problematic because blind people and people with low vision who rely on screen readers, they won't get access to any of the information that sighted people can get access to. And in some cases, it will even result in like just a collection of nonsense, like image, 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 image. And some people who are experienced with screen readers may be able to find a way to get past it and move to the next element on the page behind the charts. But also we don't really know, like especially when it comes to a newspaper that's publishing this information, the level of screen reader capabilities that the users will have. Some people will be very technical advanced and be able to skip past this, whereas other less experienced screen reader users, for example, someone who recently became blind and just started using a screen reader, will not really have found out yet how to move past this and will actually have to listen to 500 times image, 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 which is a horrible experience. And this is something that we can easily discover ourselves by learning how to use screen readers. On macOS, you have VoiceOver. On Windows, you have Narrator that come by default implemented in the operating system. And then you also have NVDA, which is a free screen reader that you can install on Windows, and JAWS, which is a paid screen reader to install on Windows. And situations where the screen reader doesn't announce anything, or only announces the text elements, or only announces image, 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 image 500 times, that's something that most people will be able to detect themselves without much external help. But then it's also important to know that in order to come up with good fixes for this, or to discover more niche issues, you will need to have a little bit more understanding over the accessibility guidelines and over accessibility best practices and how things work. And you may need to do user tests to place things in context and understand how your user specifically will interact with your charts. And more concretely, some ways to still provide an accessible experience, even if you're not certain yet how to make your charts accessible. That's by providing a table alternative, because then screen reader users will be able to navigate the table horizontally and vertically, so by row or by column, and get information beforehand about how many columns there are, how many rows there are. And that's completely universal across all websites. Every time when using the same screen reader and browser combo, a table will be announced the same way. So that's a very accessible alternative of providing data to them. And then another way of making charts more accessible is by actually turning them into elements that have semantic meaning. So by adding ARIA and by adding the roles and ARIA labels, or similar things. But again, when doing that, there's also the risk that the information that gets communicated is not the right type of information. It's not enough to just add to turn an image into a chart, for example, into an image with alt text. For example, here NRK turned this chart from the US election results into an image and added alt text, but the alt text said map over the US. And that in itself does not give the user the same information as Kamala Harris got 54 electoral votes in California and 12 in Washington, and the south of the country was mainly Republican and the north of the country was mainly Democrats. Those are insights that you get by looking at the charts, but that the alt text does not communicate. And here's another example from ABC News.
Map of election results. Use arrow keys to move around the map. Press enter to view state level map. Idaho. Washington is north. Wyoming is east. Utah is south. Oregon is west. Use arrow keys to move around the map. Press enter to view state level map. Wyoming. Montana is north. South Dakota is east. Colorado is south. Idaho is west. Use arrow keys to move around the map. Press Colorado. Wyoming is north. Kansas is east. New Mexico is south. Utah is west. Use arrow keys to move around the map. Press enter to view state level map.
So here they actually did add did turn each element of the chart into an image with alt text, and semantically, I think this was actually done correctly. But then the information that was given to the user, while technically not incorrect, it's not very useful. Like it's told for Colorado that Wyoming is north, Kansas is east, New Mexico is south, and Utah is west. That's not wrong information, but it doesn't mention how many votes the candidates, or it doesn't mention which candidate won that state and how many electoral votes they got from it, and whether or not the polls are open or closed. Like when looking at the Kansas, which is currently highlighted, there it says Kansas results, 6 electoral votes, polls are closed, and from the color red, we can deduce that it was Trump that got those 6 electoral votes. But then the alt text just tells you which states are on the left, right, top, and bottom. And there, designers can help, because when it comes to screen reader accessibility, it's a bit unfair to put all of the work on developers, because part of it is copywriting, part of it is understanding the meaning behind the chart, what type of information is being displayed, in which context will people use this. So there it's good to do some user experience research and to understand in which context people are going to use this, and then designers can start documenting this. And again, some accessibility knowledge is going to be needed there for following best practices and guidelines. And then the final thing when it comes to screen readers is that there's often incorrect usage of ARIA and incorrect usage of HTML elements for the function at hand. One that I've suddenly started seeing a lot, or two that I've suddenly started seeing a lot, is buttons that are nested in links, and also, again, tables used for layouts. It's something that was quite common, tables as layouts, many years ago, and then I stopped seeing it for a while, and now suddenly in several tools that I've been using, I've seen that people are using tables for layout again. I think it might be also related to libraries that people are using that, or some CMS choices that automatically turn tables or turn layout into tables. And the issue with that is, for example, yeah, here as well, there is a table in a table, 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 and none of these things look visually like tables. It's a navigation element and a form. And the issue there is that as a screen reader user, you're told this is a table, it has 10 rows, 5 columns. You're probably expecting to hear some kind of data, but then instead you're getting a form and you're getting an image and you're getting text. Or when it comes with links and buttons, you're maybe told that something is a link, but then it functions like a button or the other way around. So it can become a bit difficult to navigate and use. And it's an issue I actually discovered in a tool that I use a lot, because I wanted to use a custom style sheet to make the layout a bit more readable and to give different elements in a table, an actual table that was on the page, a bit more padding. But then when I said table cell, like TD, padding 0.15 rem, suddenly the entire layout broke. And that's when I discovered that every element on the page was wrapped in a table. So it also makes other areas of accessibility harder to implement. And here, Lighthouse and Axe and other testing tools can help you discover some of the issues. For example, a button inside of a link will be something that pops up as an issue, but it doesn't really know the intention of what you're building, so manual testing still is important. Lighthouse can tell you image elements don't have alt attributes, but it cannot tell you whether the alt text is useful for your users or not. And there's a whole lot of more issues that I come across and a whole lot more things that I would want to be discussing, but we're soon running out of time. But all of them are caused by the same thing. And that's the last issue that I want to bring up. And those are cultural issues. And that's that we have a work culture within tech that doesn't value or prioritize accessibility work properly enough. When we look at boot camps and school programs, many of them don't include accessibility in the curriculum, which means that we end up with people who start the workforce without knowing about accessibility. And then most workplaces don't really prioritize it. In all the years that I worked in-house or in consultancies, I, as the employee who by accident found out about accessibility, had to be the one pushing for it. It was never something that was brought up in performance reviews or something that the company set everyone together and said, now we have to start focusing on accessibility. So some people go a long way in their career before they get exposed to it, or never really learn about the impact of it. And that causes a lot of accessibility issues because you cannot fix what you don't know. And then once you start knowing about the importance of it and you want to work on it, then you end up in situations where you're not given the time, the budget, or the opportunity to learn about it or make improvements. Like when I started learning about accessibility, I had to do it on my spare time on top of a 40-hour work week. And I was lucky because at that time I had no long COVID yet, like I have right now. And I did not have children. I had a lot of spare time. I had the energy to do this, but it's not feasible for everyone to, on top of a 40, 50-hour work week, start learning new skills. And also not everyone has the budget to attend courses. So it's very difficult to get into accessibility work if your company doesn't prioritize it. And yeah, so that makes it as a practice something that's quite hard to get into and quite inaccessible to get into. But once you do learn things and you want to start improving things, then you get comments like, but our users aren't disabled, so you don't need to work on this. Or we don't have time for accessibility work right now, or we don't have budget for this right now. And when I talk with people these days who are working on visualizations, they're often telling me, yeah, I know our charts have accessibility issues and I've been wanting to fix them. They're in my backlog, but my boss doesn't let me. And it's quite hard to change an entire company culture on your own. So my advice to avoid burnout would be to focus on progress over perfection. Fix the one small issue that you can fix. Every time you open a new PR where you make improvements to your code, for other reasons, sneak in some accessibility issues. When you're documenting a new design, start documenting the accessibility of your new features and take it one step at a time. And that way, also make accessibility part of the entire process, as we've seen in some of the previous issues and fixes that I mentioned. Typically, our process is we research, we design, we prototype, we develop, we test, and then at some point we're like, hey, this should be accessible. And sometimes this is even a very long time afterwards. But the longer you wait, the deeper ingrained in accessibility becomes, and the more expensive and more difficult it becomes to fix. So it's better to start wherever you are and start implementing it across your process. So if everyone does something, when you're researching with users, include someone with a disability. If you're designing something, start thinking about color in your new features. Start documenting what you think the screen reader experience should be like. When you're developing something, start testing the keyboard or with voiceover or narrator or something. Then you start making some progress. And then the people who know about accessibility can be used to like help you, like give training or give advice, or they can answer questions that developers or designers who don't know much about accessibility have, or can come in with like specific knowledge at specific parts of the process. And that way you also avoid accessibility burnout. And once you start doing that, you can actually start using accessibility to improve everything, because you start thinking more about your charts and you start being more intentional about the content you put in there, the structure of it, and the functionality of it. And at that point, you're actually creating better visualizations for everyone. But in all of that, you do have to remember you're doing it for disabled people and because it's the right thing to do for them. This is the talk. Thank you. And if you have any questions, you can contact me either through my website, fossheim.io, or on Mastodon, fossheim@frontend.social, or over email, collab@fossheim.io.
Well, geez Louise, that was so incredibly insightful, Sarah, and I really appreciate you taking the time to present this to us. In particular, I was thinking about your progress over perfection, and how that's a great strategy for staying not burned out when you know that you have a mountain to climb, or a lot of work to do. Are there any sorts of considerations that you put into the data visualizations when it comes to accessibility that you don't do for websites, like something that's in addition, that you wouldn't normally take into consideration when you're working on a website project?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't say that there's like one specific thing, but it's more the combination of all different practices. Because like with the visualization, you have the fact that the positioning of things carry meaning, the color of things carry meaning, the shape of things carries meaning. And all of that has to be communicated in a way that makes sense to screen reader users. And you also have to think about like the color accessibility of it, and at the same time, not make it too distracting and not cause cognitive overload. And it's, for me, one of those places where every single practice comes together. You have to think about the code, you have to think about the design, about how people use things, about what the data means. So I would say I'm more intentional with things and bring usability practices way more into it than with regular websites, even though usability with regular websites is important as well, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. It seems like there's a whole lot of overlap between the two. And I mean, they're really ultimately the same discipline, but there's certain considerations that you have to take into when you're getting that nuanced and start talking specifically about SVG versus, semantic HTML.
Yeah.
And so that's really fascinating. And just the fact that like you showed, the very, what was that? A very Daft Punk like, image on the voiceover. It just goes to show that there are certain considerations there that we might not walk into when we're working on a website project.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I was also going to say, I think it's a part where like design and development also have to collaborate a whole lot. Like, as you say, the image, like you really have to test it and hear it to know that it can be an issue. And it's caused by the code, but in order to code it the correct way, you have to understand the design. So it's really like a cross-discipline part of it.
And of course, testing is a huge part of this. And testing on a website, we have web inspectors. We're able to like get X-ray views into things and debug things, programmatically that way. Is there any different tips that you might have for debugging or testing inside of a web app instead?
I would say a lot more manual testing. Because, for example, a dashboard where you click on something and then something happens on a different page, or you select a group of dots on a scatter plot, which then filters a table, that's really a lot of behavior that the automated tests can't really pick up on. Or even if they can pick up on the semantics of it, they cannot pick up on the fact that it makes sense or doesn't make sense.
That's really good. And I just have one other question for you. So, is we saw a lot of data visualizations that don't do it right, but are there any that are actually doing it quite right that you're aware of?
I really like the High Charts tool. It's a library. I think it's paid, but they have a lot of examples on their websites of how they turn line charts into lists, or how they use sonification, for example. Also, similarly, I feel like it's been a while since I've tested it, so it might be that it's over the years has gotten worse. But last time I tested it, Apple's charts were really good and more intentional with some parts of the charts would be very detailed information and other charts would be more summarizing information. And I thought it was a really good combination of it. And on top of that, I would say Leonie Watson from Tetralogical has several really good blog posts as well about how to turn visualizations into something that's accessible to screen reader users.
Oh, thank you. That's so good to know, in addition to, how things are not going well or not doing it right, where can we be pointed to see examples of, things that are doing it right. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I'm going to be walking away with from your talk is this, is about manual testing and making sure that we're actually looking at our work and not just, ignoring the issues that we see crop up here. Now, when we talk with Stephanie, we're going to learn a lot more about how we can fix these problems up front and make accessibility more a part of the culture of things. And that was where you're talking, I was like, ooh, this is the perfect bridge. I can't wait to see how Stephanie bridges this, because you start bringing up all these very big aspirational things of, hey, we want a better culture when it comes to accessibility, but how do we do that sort of thing? Well, that's what Stephanie is going to talk about. So we're going to go ahead and